Board of Education to order. The next regular Board of Education meeting is on Tuesday, September 27th at 7:30 p.m. in the board meeting room. Thank you, as I said, for all of you joining us this evening. We are headed into, or we're in week 3, and so far, the time I've spent with Alan, and I've actually been in a few schools, there's great energy and excitement as we continue to kick off the new school year. Just also, I think most people have seen it. Our friends at Channel 79 did a great job. And I have to, my hat's off to Katie Lublin. Sorry, Katie, for organizing a great kind of phase 1 ribbon cutting ceremony at the new Oxford Elementary School, which went off on Saturday. There was a great turnout, many members of the board, the Oxford Building Committee, and a lot of neighbors, and of course, parents and students, and some of the graduates from last year came back. And so it was a great tour of phase 1. The original school is, I think as of today, pretty much deconstructed. And so we're excited for phase 2, and we'll have more of a ribbon cutting ceremony when the school is fully up and running, including the auditorium, the cafeteria, the music rooms, and when we consolidate ELP into that school. So it was an exciting, perfect kind of fall morning in New England, and it was a good turnout. The other exciting thing I have here at the end of the table is to welcome back John Raskoff as a senior now, and one of our 2 student reps on the Board of Ed. So John, welcome back. I hope you had a good summer. Good to have you back. Great. And then I think a warm welcome to Swaha Chakraborty. I hope I said that right, Swaha, but welcome. Jill McCammon and I had the pleasure this morning at about 7:15 before you started classes and your calculus exam this morning. And we met and spent some time with you this morning up at the high school. And so it was a pleasure meeting you. So I'd love for you to just give a quick overview to the board of all that you've done. You came up through Tokenique and through middle school and in the high school. So I'll let you speak for a minute and introduce yourself. Just, you might pull the microphone down. You can pull it towards you and just pull it in front of you and make sure it's on. Look at the button there. No button? Okay, good.
Pull it in. Pull it closer to you. Yes. Yes, good. There you go.
All right. Hello, my name is Swaha Chakraborty, and I am the junior class representative for this year. I went to elementary school at Tokenique, went through Middlesex, and now Darien High School. And I'm looking forward to working with you guys. I'm excited and a tiny bit nervous, obviously, but yeah.
Well, thank you. We welcome you, and thanks for going through the process and the interviews up at the high school, and John and set the standard last year. So excited to have you here. And you didn't say it, but I will say it. I was fascinated this morning when we spoke, and that you're an artist. You love art and you love science. So you're putting together art and science. So we wish you a successful year, and welcome to the board.
Thank you.
With that, I will move on to public comment. Michelle?
Good evening. For participants in person, please wait for the chairperson to acknowledge and call you to the microphone. For participants via Zoom, please click the raised hand option. The facilitator will acknowledge and unmute each participant. You will have up to 3 minutes to comment. Please state your name and address. Should we start with in person?
Yes, we'll start with the folks in person. Thank you.
Hi. Good evening. My name is Joanna Walsh. I live at 17 Pleasant Street, and I am one of the co-chairs of CBSP along with Beverage. We would like to start by thanking Kathleen Barbieri and district administration for all their tireless work planning the bus schedules and sorting out immediate issues. The start of the school year is always hectic and full of hiccups, especially in regards to transportation. But at our CDSP meeting last week, we spent quite a bit of time discussing bus issues across all 7 schools. Overcrowding, bus stop locations, playdate restrictions, and renewed concerns about the DHS 2-mile walk radius were among concerns raised by PTO chairs. Anecdotally, ridership is up. The last bus study was hamstrung by COVID protocols. We respectfully ask that the district, with the support of the board, re-examine the process for creating bus routes, develop procedures to identify and alleviate overcrowding, and change either the bus radius or the rules allowing high school students to ride buses within their neighborhood, even if they are not technically eligible. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else from the audience? Okay, thank you. Anyone on Zoom, Michelle?
We have no raised hands at this time.
Okay.
Oh, wait. Miss Jackie Miller, you are, sorry, popped up at the last minute. You are recognized and unmuted.
Jackie, can you hear us?
I can. Hi, good evening.
Please.
I don't want to repeat, my name's Jackie Miller. I live at 84 Fitch Avenue. I don't want to repeat what Joanna said as much as just agree with it. I sent an email to Dr. Adley and the board members earlier today about busing. I think this is a great opportunity for us with the current bus contract up in the summer of 2024. This is a perfect time for us to really take stock of what the community needs in terms of transportation. We've been delighted to have Bus 25, and we're very supportive, or we're very appreciative of that support. But there are other busing issues within the district, not just at the high school level. And I think this is a great time for us to address them.
Thank you, Jackie.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
You too.
Anyone else, Michelle, on Zoom?
There are no raised hands at this time.
Okay, good. Thank you. We'll move on to the superintendent's report. Dr. Adley.
Good evening, everyone. It's nice to see the trickle back of people in person. Thank you for being here this evening. And welcome to Molly, I think. Molly, right? Molly is the Darien Times reporter or editor. So welcome to Darien. It's nice to have you here. Thank you to the staff and all of our parents for a successful, very successful opening, exciting opening for school. It was just wonderful to see everybody come back with the energy that they did. Thank you for all the special things that you've done along the way to make the entrances welcoming to the kids and to the staff. That was very much appreciated. Whether that you were a kindergartner or whether you were a senior like John, John, you forgive me if I call you kids, but they still came back with the same passion and excitement and hopes and dreams for the future. So just wonderful to be back. We did have a couple of comments about buses, so I'll just continue with those if I may. We have been continually working to have the bus issues, some of the pickups settled down. We have a couple of appeals underway. So it continues to be refined, and it's settling down at this particular point, but I know not for every single person who's made a request. So we respect people's patience and respect them through the process and your understanding of the situation. We also, 9/11, we just recognized, and on Friday and yesterday, the schools participated in a number of events honoring all of those who lost their lives on September 11, 21 years ago, and for all those who continue to grieve, and the heroic actions of our first responders. Some of our children wrote notes and cards and so on to the first responders in time. So again, we express our appreciation at that difficult time. Oxford ribbon cutting was with success, as the board chair said. You do have the video of it, so if you're so inclined, but it was nice, again, a nice positive energy around that. It was a beautiful day. Open houses, it was wonderful to see our parents back together with themselves and the energy and around that, but also some of our board members' experience as you went to the teachers, you reestablished that relationship, which is critical in the process. And over the past couple of years, we realized we've only been looking at each other over the screen. So it was nice to see that happening across the district, and those are going to continue to happen in the next 2 weeks. PLC at the high school this particular Friday. The presenter will be Joanne Harpo. She's the president of Coping After Suicide, post-prevention specialist. I have seen her. The staff has seen her. She's technically was to come back in person, but we just found out today that she has COVID. She's also the co-author of After Suicide, a toolkit for schools. Absolutely fabulous person to talk about post-prevention work, and even though she will not be in person on Friday, I know that to be well received by the staff. The DEI committee, the first meeting is September 19th. Just a heads up to the board, and I'll get a little bit more detail for you because some board members will be participating. The NSC accreditation visit for the high school, that visiting committee is October 11th and October 12th. I want to shout out to some of the specialists and clinicians at Silver Hospital. They have done an absolute fabulous job at our athletic and extracurricular commitment meetings. I don't know if you've had an opportunity to attend one of those with your son or daughter, but they have been very well received by parents and by students. and they just did a terrific job. Board of Ed Policy Committees on Friday, the Finance Committee next Thursday, September 22nd. We have received the state testing, SAT, AP results, and individual SBAC student reports will be sent out this Friday to parents, and we look forward to sharing our students' achievement with the board on October 25th. You'll see that it's actually October 11th is what's on the actual calendar for this evening, but with the accreditation visit, I just pushed that to the next meeting. Staffing, we have one special education open at the middle school, a special education open at the high school, a high school biology, elementary Spanish, and ELP psychologist. Those are the current vacant positions. And before we get to our next board meeting, Rosh Hashanah will be celebrated. So the school will be closed in recognition of the Rosh Hashanah holiday. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Adley. Move over to student representative report. Swaha, John.
So the Darien High School Community Council has changed its name to the DHS Student Government. They are currently in the process of holding freshman and sophomore class officer elections. This year's club fair is on September 17th, and fall sports have had a successful start. The Trunk or Treat Club event has been scheduled for October 23rd of this year, and homecoming is scheduled for the following week, the week of October 24th.
Great, thank you. John.
DHS is going to be opening a new wellness center in the chill zone in the next few weeks. We're going to be working with the guides department and support staff to give presentations on mental health and wellness. And the room will also have a variety of books, games, activities, and what might be most enticing, the possible inclusion of therapy dogs, which I know a lot of people have liked. DHS will be holding the Names Day program in early November for the freshman class, and upperclassmen volunteers will hold training sessions beforehand, just like last year. More details to come. The fall play is Shakespeare's The Tempest, which will be cast tomorrow at noon and will be performing November 17th through 19th, so make sure to save the date.
And you will be trying out for the play, John?
Actually, I'm writing the incidental score again for them. So,
Wow, exciting. Thank you. Great update. Thank you both. We'll move on to the approval of the minutes. We have a motion to approve the minutes of the special meeting and regular meeting held on August 23rd, 2022. Mr. Maroney, second by Mr. Brown. All those in favor? That is unanimous, minus Mrs. Parent. Board committee reports.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
Sure.
We had a finance committee last Thursday running through the year-end financials, and Rich is going to discuss that later.
Great. Anything else? Mrs. McCammon?
The HHR Building Committee has its next meeting on Wednesday, but what's more exciting, will just mostly be an update, is that we have completed a preliminary schematic design. It's going now to estimators for the next couple of weeks to make sure that what is on the table is actually accomplishable financially. So we are looking forward to getting those numbers back at the end of the month and then being in front of the board here, hopefully our first meeting in October, to present you the schematic design. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Joe. Any other board committee reports? Good. We'll move on to continued discussion on Board of Education Communications Committee. So I know Mrs. McCammon will give a quick update too. So I just wanted to add that I'm excited to get this committee kicked off. I think we're going to start out with co-chairs, Jill McCammon and Julie Best. And there's a lot of work that was done with the communication kind of work group. So they'll organize that. And there's some stuff that came out of the retreat also. So I think there's some work that will kick off that committee. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Mrs. McCammon.
The first meeting will be October 7th, and then we'll continue on a monthly basis. Since we have a little bit of time between now and then, would love to ask committee members to start researching other communications committees from other boards, start pulling up charges. If anybody else wants to do it too and to send us ideas, we're more than welcome to hear it. We're more than happy to hear it. And also if you have thoughts about communication plans, I think it's a good time. We can use this time in the interim to dig around and see what we find and start looking for templates of things we might want to use.
Thank you. Board questions? Okay, we will move on to presentations and discussions. Report on ESI programs 2022. Mrs. Klein, Ms. O'Reilly, Dr. McCarthy, and Ms. Straighten.
Good evening to members of the Board of Education, Dr. Adley, students, faculty, colleagues, members of the community. This evening, we have our special education and student services directors here with us this evening to present on the update on the ESY program from 2022, which was this July and August. Perhaps just before we begin, I don't know if you had the opportunity this summer to walk by the high school where you would have seen Kristen O'Reilly alongside with paraprofessionals and teachers greeting and welcoming our students at the steps alongside their arrival. Perhaps you also saw Laura Straighton, our early learning program director at Tokenique, alongside related service providers, paraprofessionals, teachers, meeting all of our early learners. But you may not have seen Dr. McCarthy, you've seen him at the high school, but one of his favorite pastimes in the summer is also going over to ELP and greeting our youngest learners. So if you didn't see Scott there, that's a part of the summer he enjoys greatly, of getting a chance to be over with our early learners. We also just want to take a moment to thank our faculty, our staff, our paraprofessionals, related service providers, and all of our participants. We know nationwide, this is probably one of the most difficult times in staffing educational milieus. We know that finding teachers and providers is an extraordinary challenge. And I just want to, on behalf of all of us here, thank all of our practitioners. We were fully staffed this summer. They brought with them their craft, their expertise, and mostly their joy to have our students enjoy, believe it or not, an enjoyable ESY summer school program. So thank you to all of them on behalf of our department. I'll turn it over to Kristen for update and Scott Moore. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm excited to present. Good evening. I'm excited to present.
Is that on?
Hello?
Yeah, I think
Yes,
you're gonna
okay.
have to
Need to
speak
get
into
closer.
it.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you, Kristen.
Absolutely. Good evening. I'm excited to present to you tonight our 2022 extended school year program presentation, and to echo Shirley's sentiment. Not only can it be difficult and challenging to staff such a wonderful program in a difficult time, a high need shortage area. We just wanted to start off by thanking our staff. It was a Herculean effort, and we just really wanted to start off and thank everyone. The staff and the administrators for their hard work in planning and in their preparation of student schedules and the coordination of materials in support of students and their progress on IEP goals and objectives as we welcome students this summer. So we really just wanted to start off there and to thank everyone. Tonight, I'll be sharing our timeline of events, which will look like sort of a familiar slide to you. I know that we presented in the spring, and we'll get there in just a few slides. We'll be reviewing student enrollment data compared to the spring presentation, the final staff totals, as well as staff and parent survey results and feedback, in addition to the 2022 ESY outcomes and the 2023 ESY goals for next year. So these first two slides should look relatively familiar to you. We review our PPT eligibility determination and sort of our guidelines that we receive directly from the state when we outline our spring and also our post-program presentation for you. So these first two slides should look very familiar to you. In determining ESY eligibility, PPT teams must consider the nature and severity of the student's disability, the student's need to attain independence related to their disability, the potential extent and regression caused by an interruption in educational programming, and lastly, the rate and recoupment following that potential interruption. And then, as we were describing in our spring pre-program presentation, we provided you with sort of the planning version of this graphic. And here we have the implementation version of this graphic. So the program began with an orientation and move-in day for staff and providers on June 24th. On this day, teachers and related service providers organized their materials in their classroom spaces for setup and preparation of student arrival, which takes place on Monday, June 27th. Staff received important information on their orientation day regarding processes and procedures to include IEP acknowledgement forms, materials from sending providers, students' IEPs, and parent contact information, as well as safety procedures, attendance procedures, and progress report due dates. Students arrived for their services on June 27th, where they were welcomed by staff and providers. Communication with parents and students was ongoing through the June and July months throughout the summer. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Information regarding service delivery was more formally shared between providers and parents through the use of the ESY progress report template, which were emailed home to parents following the completion of their child services on approximately July 29th. August 1st marked the beginning of Bridge Week 1, with students remaining at DHS and Tokenique. And for Bridge Week 2, beginning on August 8th, staff from the high school moved over to Tokenique, where all students received Bridge Week 2 services. And then this graph, familiar from the spring pre-program presentation, outlines not only the ESY recommended student total, but also reflects the actual number of students who attended the program this year. Out of the 424 students recommended, we had 352 students attend this year K through 12, which was 53 more students than ESY of 2021. The next two slides depict the number of certified and non-certified staff members for the 2022 ESY program. These two charts reflect a slight increase in the data presented during the spring presentation to account for student needs. So in the spring, we reflected 151 total staff. Since then, we increased by 3 total staff at 154. And then this graph was updated from the spring to reflect the 3 additional staff members. Those percentages were increased in this graph. This year, parents received the 2022 ESY survey early on August 3rd through Aspen's messaging system. 87 parents responded to the survey and shared their feedback regarding ESY communication and logistics, as well as their experience with transportation. 81.6% of the respondents strongly agree or agreed with communication and logistics, which included questions surrounding communication with families on student schedules, providers, room locations, etc. 64% of parents who accessed ESY transportation this year, which was about 24% of respondents, coordinated by the district's transportation coordinator, strongly agreed, or were neutral toward the level of communication and support they received with regard to the transportation they received this during this program year. Parents provided written feedback to include transportation efforts, consistency of staff members for a smooth transition, friendly staff, special education staff and effective communication, and improved practice from previous years. In addition, areas for improvement include request for more time slots for an earlier start time for their children. We had some requests for a later start time, requests for remote options when vacationing, further communication at the ELP site, and impacts to their schedule when DSS classes were canceled. Similarly, the ESY staff at both the Tokenique and DHS sites received a survey to collect their feedback. 22 staff members responded, 95.4% reporting that they strongly agree or agree with the effectiveness of ESY communication and logistics. 63.6% strongly agree or agree with the effectiveness of ESY transportation. And 86.3% strongly agree or agree with ESY safety and administrative responsiveness. In addition, staff had the opportunity to report their top 3 feelings from the 2022 ESY program, which included that staff felt fulfilled, excited, and energized. Staff went on to report that this year they felt everything went well. They received the communication they were looking for when they reached out to administrators in their building. It was a great summer, and they look forward to next year.
All set.
Okay. Oh, no worries. Suggestions for improvement. Just make sure I've caught up here. Suggestions for improvement included procedures for student absence, communication to providers throughout the day, and entry access to ESY sites earlier in the morning. And lastly, feedback from both parents and staff support the following ESY 2022 program outcomes and goals for the 2023 ESY year summer. Outcomes from this past summer include early access to parents and staff electronic surveys, initial transportation requests to the transportation coordinator by April 15th, continued electronic system for student and staff schedule revisions, and we implemented an electronic system for daily student attendance collection. Following the feedback and results of both the parent and staff surveys, our goals for the upcoming 2023 ESY program include update the student absence communication to providers throughout the school day or the summer program day, earlier entry access to the ESY building sites, and to continue to Ms. Klein's point, early recruitment for teachers related, including related service providers and paraprofessionals. And that concludes our ESY update for tonight. We'll take any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Ms. O'Reilly. Thank you very much. I know from doing drop-offs and pickups up there for the last 3 years, there's always an energy and an excitement up there. So I know my own personal experience, it's a great program in the summer. So thank you. Board questions, thoughts? Mrs. McCammon.
Thank you for the presentation, and I also concur. I thank you for the summer work, and that the kids are excited to go. That's a huge accomplishment in the summer. I am curious to know, there have been some shifts in the DSS program and what's offered. And so what I would love to understand is whether there's been any change to, if we know, whether there's been any change to the percentage of students who utilize the DSS offerings, and whether or not you heard any comments about whether or not those are any better or worse than in previous years. Again, just because there's been some shifts in what's offered.
It's my understanding that it appears to be due to enrollment, and then at the tail end, any cancellations which do directly impact any of our students' ability to any of those classes that perhaps we thought our students would be accessing, and we built schedules around. If any of those were canceled or closed at the end, it would be due to overall enrollment. So we are noticing that it's due to the overall Darien Summer School enrollment. Other than that, anecdotally, I don't know any additional information, but Shirley, I don't know if you want to speak to that.
No, I'm in agreement, Chris. I think the one thing we might want to look at is, in light of what Chris is saying also, we know there were, because of enrollment, some of the courses our students would want to participate in, they couldn't have access to. But we probably can reach out to families and get that feedback from them. What classes were they looking for that doesn't yield the enrollment that we'd like? And maybe we need to look at some different DSS classes that might be formed in order to have that offering for students. So we can certainly do that. And
And
we'll
then-
coordinate that with Kristen and Scott and myself. We can
And
do
then what we do to circumvent that, although sometimes it happens sort of really close to when ESY starts or when Darien Summer School starts, we of course then look to another class. So for example, if a student was, required that class as a part of for programmatically, we would look to another class that would support that student for what we were looking, to support from a skill standpoint. That was open to receive from an enrollment standpoint. So there are typically other options for us to consider, but that has posed some challenges for us.
I think that would be a wonderful thing to do. I do think that one of the things we do try to offer is the least restrictive environment for our kids, and the DSS classes do provide a wonderful opportunity. So, the more we can provide that to students, the better. And that I'm sure you have enough to do, and they do too, but the communication about the needs of our kids would be, I'm sure, welcome all the same.
Yeah. Just to further talk about that, I think we definitely are in agreement, and we need to look at those opportunities. The reason we're at Darien High School, in light of thinking of Oxford coming and offering an idea, is because of the opportunity for DSS classes. So precisely when we looked at ideas of having more of our elementary students in the elementary school, and then thinking, Oxford is going to be there and will be air conditioned and afford that space. We know the restrictiveness of it is it won't have that kind of access, to DSS classes, and transporting students just doesn't have enough time to do that. So we certainly can look further at how we can really look at, we know certain courses aren't running year to year. What other courses can we develop that would ensure that?
Thank you.
Okay.
Mrs. Ackman.
Could we go back to the slide about the numbers of kids participating in ESY? Thank you. So I guess the numbers on trend are rising, right?
Yeah.
There's COVID in there, and I'm just wondering, are we seeing any patterns? Are we seeing any areas of support? I understand this is all individualized, but are we seeing any patterns of areas that we think that we need to either shore up during the school year, or we're worried about losing time over the summer?
It does appear that over the last 3 years, we are just seeing about a 50 student per year trend of the actual number coming. So our recommended number appears to be high, but then when we look at actuals, we're seeing that, on trend over the last 2 years come out to be about the same for the last 3 years. But that is also increasing over the last 3 years on trend with our identification rate over the last several years. So that I would say trend-wise data over the last couple of years that is on trend.
So I guess sorry.
Just also to add to that, Mrs. Ackman, to your question, it's also based on PPT recommendations. So although we know our number of classification rate has increased also over the last several years, which we've spoken about, we know that additional numbers of students are recommended for ESY. That said, the variables we actually look at of not all students who are recommended for programs are recommended for ESY.
Right.
And it really, because it's student specific, you can't look at a trend, because the trend really is reflective of the different PPT decisions. So that's one piece. We do know the trend that always seems to happen over the years is more students are recommended than actually participate. That seems to be consistent. And very often it's because families change their minds and they travel, or they take vacations, or they're not available. We're also flexible with that. We have several students who might take off a week or two in between and then return. So we're able to accommodate students that way also. But I think the increase in classification rate is one variable. The individual recommendations for PPT recommendations for ESY is another variable. And I think the only real change was during COVID. I think there were more students participating because less families were vacationing, going away. That's fine.
So do we see any trends in our recommendations surrounding the PPT? If we're recommending more kids, is there any trend data, or this is all individualized and we're seeing, I recognize it's all individualized, so I want to ask it accurately, but are we seeing within those recommendations any trends? Like we are now recommending it more in the areas of apples versus oranges.
I don't know that I have that offhand. One should never guess, okay?
Yeah.
But they have to. But we certainly can look at that. From my experience at meetings, and I can turn to my colleagues also, I haven't seen a significant trend. So, we know that literacy, there's a strong component of reading. We don't want children to lose those skills, so we know that very often, especially specific reading programs are recommended during the SY. So you'll always see a higher level of literacy recommendations. I think speech and language is a really important piece that you don't want any regression. So related services. So I don't think there's been a change in trend. I think it's based on student need.
Okay, thank you.
And I think in the spring, we talked about more like whole picture, sort of through COVID and the impact. We talked about recovery and having that lens, and the state gave us that guidance rather than maybe individual disability category trends and things like that. I think it was more whole child and impacts and things, how have students been impacted and what can we do to plan thoughtfully over the summer to account for some of those impacts. I think that's where we've helped guide PPT teams, and we've seen recommendations come from teams through that lens over the last couple of years. And I think you see that in the recommended numbers spiked, but then when you also look at the actual numbers of students coming, you're seeing that parents are making it appears to be the same decision making, a lot of the same decisions, in student attendance over the summer, in terms of if they're going away or if they're having their children attend.
I would add one piece to that. To your question, Ms. Stockman, what we did see, and I don't know if I'll call it a trend, but what we did see, which was an increase of frequency and duration of some services. And we spoke about that during budget time. We spoke about during, as a result of COVID, there was regression and loss services and in-person services. So a child who might have been receiving speech 2 times a week really had it 4 times a week in the summer. So there was a change in frequency and duration, but I don't know if it's a trend. It was an outcome of COVID.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Ackman. Mrs. Best.
Kristen, I think you touched on it, but the survey responses on communication and logistics, they strongly agreed that communication and logistics were effective. Okay, because there were a few comments in here about communication. So I was just trying to make sure that we weren't picking up.
Was it more from the parent or the staff one?
The staff one, I think, only mentioned communication about absences, but I think it was more from the parent one.
Yeah, from the parent one, 81.6% of the 87 parents that responded that they strongly agree with the questions asked surrounding communication and logistics.
And those questions were positive.
Yes, yes, I should have stated that. Yeah, absolutely.
Good. Thank you. Any other board thoughts? Good. Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks for,
Thank you.
thanks for all the hard work. It's a great summer program. So thank you very much. Thank you to all you folks on
Thank you very much.
Zoom land. We will move on to discussion on fiscal year 2022 year-end financial report and possible board action to return unused funds to the town. I will turn that over to Mr. Rudel.
All right. So this is the unaudited year-end financials for fiscal year 22. There is a positive balance of $694,439, about 0.65%. We did want to highlight, though, even though that does seem like a large number, the majority of the money is actually excess cost related. We did receive a higher reimbursement of about 80% compared to the 67.5% that was budgeted. If you take out that and the unused portion of budget control, we really are only returning $102,000, which is about 0.1% of the budget. So we really did run rather lean this past year. As always, we are reflecting The breakdown between general education RCs, special education RCs, and COVID. The general education RCs were a positive 124 to end the year. Special education RCs, 565,000 positive for the end of the year. And then COVID was $4,600. I'm just highlighting the COVID and ARP grants. The operating fund did have $56,000 in expenditures, primarily substitutes related to the DEA memorandum of understanding, and then some small transportation costs and material costs. Overall salaries were to the positive by $68,000. The majority, again, is that unused portion of budget control for $43,000. Operating was positive to the $95,000. The bulk, about 83%, really fall in the buckets of legal fees, which were just shy of $20,000 to the positive. Various materials, travel, and PD accounts, which were positive to the $22,000, and then special education tuition positive $37,000. Fixed expenditures were positive $30,000. The bulk of that really was in some of the health insurance, which is really dental insurance, and then workers' compensation, and then some utility accounts. Then finally, revenue was positive $500,000 to the budget. Again, the bulk of that was excess cost of $548,000. We did have a slight shortfall in field and building rental revenue by $19,000. And then ELP tuition was short of budget by $40,000. And then Medicaid revenue was a positive $11,000 budget. So we don't have any transfers for the board to approve, but the year-end balance to return to the town is the $694,000.
Thank you, Mr. Riddle. Board questions, thoughts? May I have a motion to approve the year-end financial report for fiscal 2022? Mr. Sini, second by Mr. Maroney. All those in favor? That is unanimous, minus Mrs. Parent. All right, good. Thank you. You'll hand deliver that check to the town. Next, further consideration on proposed position for Director of Mental Health in the district. Dr. Adley.
I'm pleased to revisit this request to establish a Director of Mental Health for the district who will oversee and lead efforts in the mental health area. Also will address mental health programming, the regulatory requirements from the state for social climate coordinator, family care coordinator, mental health plan for students, athletes, and social emotional learning for all students. So in addition to the immediate needs, also in the district, it's also trying to address some of the statutory requirements. What the board has in front of them are basically questions that were asked from the last board meeting when we discussed this matter, and the administrative's responses back to those. The updated job description, there are two highlighted areas. One was that serves the responsibility serves as the Director of Family Care Coordinator, including acting as a liaison with community mental health resources and mental health experts. In discussions with Ali Randstad, we would be probably including here that co-chairs of some of those committees, the post-mention committee. This person would work collaboratively with the town in that particular capacity. I think that's a positive thing to do. The other major change was to make sure that we collaborate with the curriculum team to ensure delivery of a coherent curriculum, a wellness curriculum inclusive of social emotional learning and student mental health for grades pre-K to 12. So that's the job description updated. You can see the questions here. I can certainly go through these one at a time if it's helpful to members of the public here. Are we appropriately staffed with psychologists, social workers, and school counselors? Currently, yes. If we have any other requests that would come through the 24 budget process requests. Should this Director of Mental Health be working with the entire Darien community? We have a need for a full-time person in the district, and at the town level, there are community needs and different needs. We certainly all collaborate and collaborate very, very closely. We do that already with Ali, and she's been also a tremendous help to us and supportive of this. We do need this full-time position in the district. So yes, we will collaborate with the Darien community in this capacity and all aspects of mental health for our students in the town. Will the person be doing research on suicide prevention? that will be one aspect of it. That person will bring all expertise, including any review of literature or research or best practices. Will this person ensure that there's vertical and horizontal alignment? That we had a discussion at the board level last week about this, and clearly this would be one of the responsibilities in collaboration with Dr. Tranberg and also Mrs. Klein. What kind of professional learning will this person develop? It'll all be around mental health, including suicide awareness, prevention and intervention, stress and anxiety, depression, substance abuse, and physical health and wellness. So it's all inclusive of those matters, and also serve as a community liaison to our parent community. How do we compare with other districts? Other districts have different designs in their plans, depending on their actual individual needs and where they are at this particular time with the needs of the community and also the school community. How are we funding this position? The request is being suggested to be funded by a transfer of funds. I would ask that we could expedite this as quickly as possible, and doing that, we'd look to transfer budget control, and that we have one. As the board knows, we budgeted for 2 teacher in residence. We have only been able to secure 1 teacher in residence through CREC, and so we would suggest that that would be part of the transfer. Yes, it is the case that these would be part of the budget for next year, right? So budget control, unless the board decided differently, would come back again. And the teacher in residence, we fully would like to hire 2 of those particular positions, so that would come back again. So yes, this would be a budgetary item as we move forward for 24. So those are the recommendations. I appreciate Ali's contributions along the way here, and I'm happy to entertain any questions the board may have.
Thank you, Dr. Adley.
And a big thank you to Scott, who continues to work very closely in this arena.
Thank you, Mr. McCarthy. Mr. Sini.
Thanks for all the answers to the questions, Ellen. Just one follow-up on are we appropriately staffed with psychologists, social workers, and school counselors? I think the issue has come up, feet on the ground, the creation of the wellness zone or the mental health wellness zone is coming along, but is this properly staffed for a crisis mode that we're in right now, the suicide postvention phase, or are you kind of answering the question going forward in the prevention phase and outside of a crisis mode? I'm just trying to understand if we need extra resources in this crisis mode at the student level.
Look, you could certainly equip the high school with lots of resources. I feel it's well equipped at the moment. It's likely that there'll be recommendations come through the budget process. I think that'll be very likely.
Okay.
And I think this person also, if the person is on board soon enough, will also help with that recommendation process.
Mrs. McKenna.
Related to that, last week we talked a little bit about talking to the student body to better understand what their needs might be, with the understanding, of course, that we are a school system. We have some limits. But is that part of this person's job, or is that really something, Chris and Shirley, that falls under your auspices and is somewhat separate from this role?
I would say that the mental health providers, for instance, Scott's on the phone here, the administration at the high school, the principal would oversee that feedback process.
Thank you.
I guess my only question would be, how have we come to the conclusion that we are properly staffed? I mean, I think the last conversation, things couldn't be quantified. So I'm just curious how that came about.
So the staffing is an assessment through the administration and also in consultation with our clinicians that are advisors on this. If we're going to make any changes, I wanted to make sure we're doing it in a thoughtful way, in a reflective way that will be long lasting. And so I'm not going to look to the board and say that I'm precluding moving forward here, that we wouldn't be coming back and for asking other resources or other positions. But at the moment, I'm not making that request. And I think that it's likely that there'll be something in the 24 budget, but if there's an acute need, I would not be hiding that acute need to the public, to our staff, but most particularly to our children, and certainly not to the board. So if there was an acute need, I would be bringing to the table here.
Mrs. McCammon.
We touched on this last time, but I'm going to ask that we do it again. In terms of how we got to defining this role as being what the role is, I see the drivers from the bottom up, but you mentioned we did talk to who was involved in sort of defining this next step. Who do we consult? Who do we bring to the table?
I'm happy to answer that question, but since he's here, maybe we'll bring him into the fold and ask Scott. I'm happy to answer it myself, actually, but since you're here, Scott, you were also involved with that. Do you want to name some of the parties? Because
Sure, I'd be happy to. We worked closely with Child Guidance, who is the vendor for 211 in our area, Family Centers, the Hub, which is the agency that did the training for QPR for the entire district, and also the agency that is leading the postvention work at the town level. We also collaborated with Adley in the town human services, and then of course worked with the State Department of Education and DEMIS, which is another state agency.
You want to finish, Mrs. McCammon?
Just as a follow-up to that. So then if you sat down and talked together, what is the question you asked to solve? Again, I can see from the bottom up that we've built a position, but what was your premise that you started with trying to solve?
Sure. So, I think we've talked a lot about the fact that in the period following sort of a tragedy like this, that immediate 6-month period, we're in a reaction phase. And so we're looking at how do we respond to a reaction? How do we develop a postvention team? And at the same time, how do we think about this problem from a proactive, preventative, comprehensive approach moving forward? So how do we think about this from a social emotional learning perspective? How do we think about this from a curriculum perspective? How do we think about this from a tiered intervention perspective of social behavioral health? So in looking at thinking about the 6-month window of being critical in our response, also thinking about at the same time moving forward towards prevention work.
Thank you.
Sure.
So, following up on Mrs. Worm's question, I don't see these as mutually exclusive, but if I understand this role correctly, this role is really dealing with, to Dr. McCarthy's viewpoint of looking forward, dealing with curriculum, outside liaisons. But prior to all the sadness of last spring, we had psychologists who were overstaffed, working hours, arguably pushing up against the contract. And I think there is a concern, and I don't know that they have to compete other than we're looking at resources, that in this new environment, in this prevention environment, are there kids that we just didn't have the time to see before? And do we need, maybe we need this, which is handling those outside agencies and looking forward in curriculum, but is there a complementary role we need? And I think, maybe I'll make it my question so I don't put words in Mrs. Worm's mouth, but are our psychologists overworked? Like, what are their caseloads right now? How many hours are they working? Because this might be needed for a look forward, but our psychologists are literally the boots on the grounds in this. And if kids want to get in to see a psychologist right now, can they? Or if they want to get in to talk to someone, is there someone they can talk to?
So I'm not receiving, and we do have the discussions about it, the feedback that our students are here. So maybe if they want to talk about it, they may, they can tip into this discussion. I'm not seeing that they can't speak to someone or not getting to someone. I think this position also will serve to actually help us. Again, it's not mutually exclusive, as you say. I think this position can help assess what other interventions are needed and advocate for those interventions along the way. Charlie, if you want to talk about the school psychologist, it's appropriate.
I just wanted to address that question also. And I think we spoke last time about it, and I'll just take one piece before that. The notion of the director of mental health is really, again, to bring this together, to go pre-K through 12. And that's a difference as opposed to personnel in each building. So we spoke about one language, pre-K through 12, and look at that. So really the design in light of what Dr. McCarthy was saying from all the stakeholders was to begin all this work in our pre-K program, and that it goes through the schools. The notion of psychologists, and I probably can safely say this, Dr. McCarthy, weigh in this, psychologists are always overworked. Okay, you can, it just goes with the territory. It goes with their commitment to their students and their families, and that's what it is when you're a psychologist. And a teacher and other related service providers. I'm not distinguishing that. So I think the design of how we have our school staffed, and we certainly can probe more, but from our understanding, which is why we asked for what psychologist, we have one psychologist per grade in the high school. So we know that they loop with them and they follow them. We have 8 counselors. We know they loop and they follow them. We have 1 social worker. So when you look at the staffing ratio of students to whether it is an extraordinarily difficult time or your high school time, which is inherently has a lot of time that students need support, we do believe we have the proper level. Because as I said last time on the question, if you add 1 psychologist, it won't change the dynamic of what the work looks like. In the middle school, we have that same design. We have 3 psychologists, and this changed over the years. If you remember years ago, we didn't. We have 1 per grade, and they loop with them also and follow them. We've got, thanks to the board, 2 counselors on each grade also, 6 school counselors. So again, we have enough support. And the question is, can people use more? Yes, you always can use more, but we have the proper design of the support we have in those buildings. And on the elementary school level, thanks to your support, we have 2 school psychologists who loop respectively with their students and their caseload for all students. So the school counselors, the school psychologists, social workers are not divided between special education students and general education students. They're there for all our students. And we do feel we have the proper level. I think the intention of this position is really to be able to have a thread that goes through all our schools. I was negligent, I didn't mention, of course, the full-time psychologist at Fitch, which we have there as well, to make sure no one has to go back and forth or travel or do that they're there full-time. And also, of course, ELP, where we have a full-time psychologist that we don't have right now because of staffing, but we're in the process of interviewing also. So I do believe it is proper to say that we are properly staffed in our respective schools. We would like to help tie everything together, which deals with tier level instruction, which deals with curriculum, which is a liaison with outside agencies and all the other work that we have to do.
So
I would just add in too, I apologize. I would just add in too, I think a framework to think about this in some ways is very analogous to how we think about learning. So if we were to identify that we had an over-identification of students with reading problems, right, or reading disabilities or reading concerns, and our approach is just not just, but is to add more reading specialists and not think about how are we preventing reading problems from occurring from a system perspective and from a framework of how are we providing instruction for all. We're sort of playing whack-a-mole with problems. It's far more advantageous to take a parallel track and to look at supporting the emergency needs of students, which were being supported by child guidance, by family centers. Clinicians are in the buildings far more than they were before. We're being supported right now, and we know that 6-month critical window, which we see, coming to a close this fall. We know that we need that support right now, but on the flip side, we have to be thinking about how do we be strategic in training our general education teachers and training our entire building and staff, and thinking about social emotional learning, not from a reaction once we have a problem, but from actually being proactive and helping children develop the coping skills that they need, so that we aren't hopefully seeing them seek out the mental health support in emergency situations as frequently.
So just one quick follow-up. I guess what I would say then, and that's why I don't know if the question Mrs. Worm and I are kind of trying to tick away at is mutually exclusive than this. But what I would hope from this role then, and the one stakeholder I don't see in here, is that if this position is to be supported by the board, they go to the kids and ask the kids what they need. I think they have a real voice in what they need. And sometimes the structures we set up, maybe like, add another psychologist, isn't where they need to go. So if the idea is that this is where recommendations are going to come from, I would really ask that the student voice and choice is heard in what their needs are, because they have been through so much, and I think they can be fairly articulate and help us learn what they need.
Can I just add on to that? Sorry, Mr. Brown, I know you. It's a direct connect of, it's not, first I do want to shout out to Megan Emanuelson and the school counselors, because if you were, I know Mr. Deneen, you always ask, is there anything you need Megan whenever she presents? Right now, she might say, I need all the things, I need everyone, because they have been very, very busy. But they're working on this wellness center, and they don't know if they need someone yet. But as soon as, when it comes to the budget time, then I think we'll know for sure. But they're busy. So I do want to make sure that we're making it clear that people are busy. It's not like it's always been before, but this position is also working on climate. And climate's not just about making sure there's someone to go to, it's making sure students feel like they have someone to go to. There's a difference, because people can be there for them to talk to, but they need to know that that's a person they can go to talk to. And that might sound, well, what's the difference? There's really a big difference. They need to feel safe going to a person in school. And those are the conditions that we're hoping this position can help create for all students.
Thank you, Mr. Tramper. John.
I did want to just say that anecdotally, I have several good friends that I know who have been heavily utilizing the school psychologists and mental health personnel. And I've never heard of any conflicts of, overscheduling on their part. The other thing is, I do know that DHS is currently trying to heavily prioritize, even without or with the addition of this additional administrative role, the DHS is trying to address how students view going to an administrator to talk about these kind of issues. So I'm not sure necessarily if having this extra person would at present provide that much of a newer opportunity for a student to go and talk to someone, because if they don't feel comfortable with, one administrative person, then I'm not sure why they would, as of right now, feel any more comfortable with someone else, unless that role were to be so heavily and outwardly focused on, student, climate and comfortability, that it was kind of one of its main purposes. And it would have to be kind of on that list as one of the central core ideas if it were to, make an impact that I think would be meaningful.
Thank you, John. Mr. Brown.
Following up to Mrs. Worm and Mrs. Ockman's point earlier, and solely focused on answer 2 here with regard to the psychologist. Shirley, thank you for the detailed answer. I'm gonna have to watch it because I didn't get all that. There's a lot there, but thank you. But I would ask, going back to when we added the second psychologist, part of the presentation, you remember my favorite slide with the DERG and staffing levels. But you did provide some of that information in terms of what the days look like, in terms of how many hours, in terms of how many service levels, I should say, and what's going on in some of the other DERGs. So I think going back to the quantitative question, if we do have that data, it was certainly a selling point as to why, because we were given that data. Maybe we get a refresh on that and kind of answer the quantitative question here that goes into decision making, please.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Any other board questions or thoughts? Good. All right. Thank you, Mr. Maroney.
So thank you, Dr. McCarthy and Dr. Tranberg, on your clarity, because I think it's cleared up the role for me in some ways. But I'm still struggling. Struggling is maybe the wrong word, but how are we going to judge success or not of this position? And what is that? What are the metrics we're going to use, and how will we know we don't need more, less, or how do we determine that going forward?
Ultimately, no, I'm not looking at you. I'm talking about the students. Actually, ultimately, it'll be how are we servicing our students to feel as if they are being serviced. What's the feedback on that? The climate of the school, the social and emotional wellness of the school, the ethos of the school, how welcome people feel in the school. All of these things are all mixed in together. It's not just one particular issue. Certainly the idea, like evaluating, do we have enough mental health services will be part of it. But the idea of, are we addressing their needs as identified here? I mean, not completely a straight line. And you know, we want to prevent this happening again. These types of incidents are happening again. That seems like a big burden for one person. It is, of course, it is. But ultimately, we want to change how people feel, how the kids are connected in relationships with people, the climate of the school, all those things.
So I think what I appreciate that and all the conversation, I think what I continue to hear from the board, and I think this has to continue to evolve, you know, and I think the board's supporting the concept, but I think what I'm hearing is that I think, and personally too, how is that done over the course of the next year? Is it done through surveys? Is it done through small groups of students coming together? You know, is it done through feedback from the counselors and feedback from the psychologists? And I know it's personal information and you can't identify anyone, but I think that's what I'm hearing, like would like to see or feel from the board, that we're having those focus groups or those small meetings and we're getting feedback, and that very difficult to put on a chart or anything like that, but that the climate is moving in the direction you want people. To John's point, the key to me is people have to feel comfortable going to talk to people. You hear great stories about how comfortable these kids are going to talk to the SRO. Well, what's the secret sauce there? You know, why are they comfortable going to talk to an SRO? How do we get them to that comfort level to talk to a counselor or a psychologist in the same way they may talk to an SRO? So, or the same way they may talk to a coach, you know, or if they're in theater or the arts or different things like that. There are people that kids gravitate to, and we should think about who those people are, like capture what their secret sauce is and have that part of the conversation of how this becomes effective.
I would just add to that.
Sorry, Scott. Just on one simple level, these responsibilities need to be addressed. So the evidence, and we could play out the evidence of these responsibilities, but these responsibilities, the board would want to see, are we addressing these and how are we addressing those? Yeah. Sorry, Scott.
That's okay. I was just going to add to Mr. Maroney, to his question. You know, I think when you're looking at a problem, the success of a position like this is really in thinking about in an entry position, sort of the deliverables. So we need to evaluate and assess and select a screening process to understand what our kids are feeling. If we want to go to the kids and find out how are you feeling, we need to ask them. Is that through focus groups? Is that through screeners asking them questions? We need to get those results, evaluate those results, and then design interventions to address those results. So it's really around deliverables to me. Is there a tier 2 intervention structure for kids to have access to mental health support if they're screened into intervention groups? Those types of pieces of information or those types of deliverables are really the success of this type of position. And I think first, to many of the board members' points, we first need to ask a lot of questions. So we have to collect a lot of information before we can actually make decisions about where what's implemented from those programs.
Thank you, Mr. McCarthy. Mrs. Ackman.
Just quickly, I'd say that this meeting is making me far more comfortable with this position in the sense that what I'm hearing is, one, we have statutory obligations we have to fulfill. Someone has to do them, right? And two, what this really is supposed to be the area from which the ideas are coming from, to make a real impact in students' lives. And I think that's where at least I am and some fellow other board members, we just want to get there, right? So if what you're telling us, I think I can be far more supportive of what you're telling us is this is the naissance, this is the person doing the work, reaching out to the stakeholders to really start suggesting changes to climate and support systems for kids, be they be a psychologist or the outside groups we've talked about coming in. But that's how I would need to see this really talked about and focused about if the board's to vote on it. I know you want to move quickly on this, and I'm not saying tonight, but I need this to be the place where the good work is doing that will reach kids in order to support.
I think you've actually captured it nicely there, Tara.
Mrs. McCammon.
I also feel a lot more comfortable after this evening, because I think the piece that actually sort of putting together, Scott, your point about the reading intervention and how we think about that was very helpful in translating this. And then Duke, your comments that reminded us that different students need to go to different people, and that all of our teachers and our coaches and our support staff are somebody for somebody. And so I understand better your point that we're trying to spread out the ability for all of our staff to support our different students. Again, I think that counselors and psychologists have a specific role, but I get it a little bit better. And I think that's an important point. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. McCann. Good, yeah, Mrs. Best.
Thank you. I think I was pretty there on this idea in our last discussion, but I think this has been a very helpful conversation for me as well, just to get a further understanding of this position and what this person will do. I thought Mr. Maroney's question was particularly interesting because I think it brings to light, we haven't historically measured our successes as a district by how the kids are feeling, right? And so we're not used to that, and it's not a comfortable or easy thing for us to do. We usually look at how people are performing versus how they're feeling. So I think it's fair that it's going to be tricky to understand how this works. But obviously, I think we all recognize that there's huge value and importance in that. And moving forward, the more and more room this individual has to be promoting wellness in our district, I think will be a great mark of how successful we're being. So thank you.
Mrs. Best. Mr. McCarthy, Mrs. Klein, Mr. Tranberg, thank you very much. Continued good dialogue around that.
So moving forward with Mr. Chairman.
Yep.
If it's the board's pleasure, I'd like to suggest we, at the finance committee, we consider doing a transfer for this and then bring it forward in that capacity, or does the board want anything else at this particular point?
Otherwise, we put it on an agenda item for a vote to move it forward and then for transfer.
I just have more of a budget question. Sure. Does that mean that this will then not show up in the budget?
Well, it'll have to show up for the following budget, yes, for the 24 budget, because if we're keeping the other, I'll call the other programs.
I think what Dr. Adley is saying is he will bring it to the finance committee to decide whether to recommend a transfer to the board or not. If we approved the transfer would go, but you'd have to look at, I believe given the level, we need to approve the position as well.
Yes.
So it's a two process.
I think I'd like to do it the opposite way, have the board approve it and then go to the finance committee. If that's.
So it approve the position and then go to the finance.
And then it
committee.
will show in the budget as a transfer to that position.
And then to your point, Tara, it's part of next year's budget then, and it would be built into that budget since it's added this year.
The recommended budget.
Yep.
Right, so it'll be built into the budget. It won't be seen as an increase in the budget.
Well, yes, it will be an increase. Yes, yes, it will be an increase. Yes,
next year.
It will show to that gap.
Yes. Good. All right.
So we put it on for approval at the next meeting. Is that
yes
for creation of the position?
Yes. Okay. And then at the next finance committee meeting. We'll move on to presentation and discussion of the proposed board master agenda for August 2022 to February 2023.
There's an initial draft here. I've heard some comments tonight that will impact that, including the HHR committee would go on, I think, October 11th. I'm suggesting, given that NEASC is those couple of days over October 11th, that the testing report will move to October 25th. Beyond that, if the board would like to review this and get back to me with any questions or concerns or suggestions. You'll see the way the cross-outs were some of the decisions that the board made at the retreat of how to address certain topics. Probably could take one of the October 25th, even the mental health update, and bring it into October 11th if we've made a couple of changes to the October 11th, but we can do that.
So again, for review and further discussion and vote. Any questions currently on it? Okay, good. Thank you, Dr. Adley. We'll move on to the personnel report. Marge, anything to update there? No? I think Alan went over kind of what the openings are. Okay, good. So we'll move on to action items. Action item contract between the Board of Education and the Superintendent of Schools. We have renewed the 3-year contract for Dr. Adley, 2022 to 2025, with the board in discussion with Dr. Adley, with a 3% increase to his salary for this year, and all other terms and conditions of the contract remain the same. Any questions or comments? We have a motion to approve the contract between the Board of Education and the Superintendent of Schools. Mrs. Best, second by Mr. Maroney. All those in favor? That is unanimous with Sarah Parent out.
Thank you to the board. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Adley. We will move on, Michelle, to public comment.
Hi, Sarah Gortel, 22 Brushy Hill Road. I just have it's a comment and a question, just as it relates to the position that we were just talking about. I'm excited about this position. I agree that we need it. My question is just whether this is a full-time employee or a contract employee. And the reason I say it isn't that I don't see the importance. This could be even more money the way that I'm saying it, but we need a change maker. We need someone who can really affect the culture of the school and the town. And sometimes from within, that is harder to happen. So just a question to pose, like, could we get a psychiatrist, or is it someone who ran a wilderness program? Or, I mean, just really thinking differently about this problem and opening ourselves up to all sorts of different possibilities of types of people. So just to open it, thinking about it as contract versus someone more specialized. So just something, food for thought.
Thank you. Thanks for speaking. Anyone on Zoom, Michelle?
There are no raised hands at this time.
Okay, thank you all. Thank you all for coming this evening. May I have a motion to adjourn this meeting? Mrs. Ackman, second by Mr. Maroney. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.